I'm Vicky Carter and you're listening to the Let's Go Kickass Today podcast, Season 2, Episode 8. Every month I interview incredible people from the fields of music, adventure and culture. And this month, for International Women's Month, it's all about women. Hell yes! I interview breakfast presenter, journalist and all-round Wonder Woman Sonia Watson.
You got to be happy with who you are and try not to pretend, even though there's pressures to change sometimes. Try not to change who you are.
Adventurer, author, cyclist and environmentalist Kate Rawles.
Cycling from Colombia to Cape Horn, as you said, while trying to unpack the biodiversity story and why it's so important and what's positive being done and what can we learn from that back here.
And actress, writer, comedian and activist Alexis Strum.
And I'm in the wings, not noticeably pregnant at that point, about to go on stage and just thinking, oh my God, there's like an ethical thing here. I'm not sure I can actually go on.
I interview breakfast presenter, journalist and all-round Wonder Woman Sonia Watson. She tells me about her journey of how she got to be where she is now, being a continuity announcer on TV to millions of people, the importance of being authentic, and any advice for you if you want to break into radio. I'll be honest with you, this is the least prepared of an interview I've ever done before, because
I'm not prepared.
I think it would be fun. I think on the one hand, I know you so well, but on the other, I really don't. I know about your kids, I know about your partner, I know how much you love coffee and Prosecco, what stories you love. But apart from that, I don't know anything else about your background apart from, you once were a massive raver and get yourself into situations that are very similar to mine. And as I'm interviewing you for the music section, because I think broadcasting and the world of broadcasting and media is so related to that industry, tell me about how it all began, when it all started, because you've also worked for not only BBC Essex, obviously co-host the Benson Breakfast Show, but also, a part of the news team. You were also presenting on the weekends. You've worked for Heart as well in their news editor. You've been a voiceover. There's so many different elements that bring you to this very moment where we've crossed paths.
It was kind of a weird way, I think, that it all started for me. I've always had quite a passion for telling stories, I think. Even when I was sort of 8 or 9, I remember my parents got a camcorder, and it's this wacky great camcorder that my dad used to take with us when we went away on holiday, mostly in the UK, mostly places like Cornwall, and he'd film the places we went on the day trips, and I would present to the camera and do a little piece to camera to say where we were and what we were doing during the day. And that was when I was really quite little. And then as I went into my teenage years, a friend who used to live down the road from me and I, we just used to sit in our bedrooms with a cassette player and record pretend radio shows and pretend to be radio presenters, and we'd pretend to do American shows, putting on American accents and doing almost like radio plays and all sorts of crazy stuff, just letting our imagination run wild. So it's always something I've been really, really interested in, just sort of telling stories, really, I suppose, and also talking. I like talking.
Yeah.
I really love talking. And you know me pretty well through working together anyway. I really love being around people. And as a side note, I think that's why this last year has been really challenging for me, because my personality, probably quite like you, Vicky, is I'm a bit of a social butterfly. I like to be around people, hear their stories and talk and have a bit of fun. So it's always been a passion in terms of what I like and my personality. And then when I did my sort of English and media degree, I kind of fell into doing a bit of work experience at one of our local radio stations. And I just offered myself up and said, do you want me to come in and do some stuff for free? And they said yes. And that went on for quite a few weeks. They got an extra pair of hands and didn't cost them a penny. And I got a load of experience in a newsroom and got to do some on-air stuff from quite an early point in my career. And then that led to being able to apply for jobs and having that demo tape and being able to say, I know what it's like in a newsroom. I haven't just studied it, I've actually been in it. And that's how it all kind of started. It was, I don't know whether it was fate, but it just seemed to all weirdly fall into place and just fit with something I'd kind of always been doing, even from a young age, really, I guess.
That's so interesting, because that's exactly what I did when I was young. My dad's got a video of me outside Wataran in Bangkok in Thailand going, "Hi, I'm Vicky and I'm outside Wataran," you know, like, oh, I'm so ridiculous. So you've obviously highlighted, you know, how key the experience is being in the newsroom after having a qualification. Do you think for many people that sets it apart, being able to actually say, look, I've physically been in the newsroom, the practical experience, rather than having the qualification, or just do both go hand in hand?
I suppose they both go hand in hand to a point, but I would always say really the most that you learn is when you're actually doing the job. And you know, you can learn all the legal stuff and you can learn about how to theoretically write a good news story, and that gives you a sort of good grounding, it stands you in good stead. But really the bulk of what you learn is when you're in the newsroom, because all of a sudden you're then having to deal with asking difficult questions, sometimes dealing with grieving relatives, how to approach them, dealing with deadlines and the reality of deadlines, and then having to put things together and technology failing and all of those sorts of things which happen to you on a daily basis, being able to cope in a crisis as well. Because sometimes, as you well know, you know, we can be this kind of complete calm on air, but behind the scenes, the amount of fretting that's going on because phone numbers aren't working, technology's failing, we're running out of time. You know, there's so many things going on. And I don't think you really get the confidence to be able to cope with all of that until you're actually doing it. There's no substitute for real experience, I don't think.
I think you're incredibly talented at what you do, because like you've highlighted then, you know, you can switch dramatically. You'll be holding like people to account and finding out the real information, and then you'll do a massive gear change to, you know, really hearing an emotional story that a local radio listener has called up wanting to connect and sharing. And then you'll next stage, you know, it'll be a bit of banter and you'll be something kind of innuendo that you're trying to hold back from laughing. which is pretty talented, you know, to be able to adjust so well. So obviously now your present time is in local radio. You've also worked in commercial radio. What were those, and voiceovers, what were those experiences like?
I mean, pretty the same, really. Commercial radio is pretty similar to BBC local radio. You just get less time to sort of get your points across. Everything has to be much tighter, much shorter in terms of how it's written and edited and delivered. So it kind of has to sound a little bit more pacey, I suppose. Local radio, you've got, in BBC-wise, you've got more time to do stuff in a little bit more depth, which is one of the things I really like about it, actually, the fact that you don't have as much time constraints. TV voiceover was totally different altogether. It was just sitting in a broom cupboard watching telly and getting paid for it. I'll be honest with you, it's kind of like a dream job, and I absolutely loved it. And I have to say, the day I left, and it was my decision to leave, but the day I left, I cried, because it was just such a brilliant job and such a great bunch of people. But it was just the way it was being done was changing, and they were moving to a different part of London, which I realistically couldn't commute to. And so I sort of ended up getting back into news. But continuity was a great job to do. It's a lot of fun, and basically sitting watching telly and getting paid for it.
That's so great. Is there any moments where you thought, oh my gosh, I really want to say that, should I say it, should I get away with it? Because some of the things that people say, they nailed it so well. It's being so quick and responsive and coming back with like quick-witted things, which, you know, I'm awful at with comebacks, but you know, you nail it to the T, which is obviously why you did it really well in that previous job. But were there any times where you had to bite your tongue and were like, actually maybe this isn't suitable?
Probably loads of times, probably more recently in my job now, because it's hard, isn't it? It's hard. Some of the issues are quite emotive and all that sort of stuff, so you're always having to be thinking about that as well, and making sure that you're balanced in everything that you do. The stuff with TV is very, very tightly controlled, because we always used to write the scripts and have to get them approved before they went to air. So that was, I suppose, a little bit more regimented. You'd be able to be pretty creative, but it would always have to be done well in advance, and then they'd have to be approved. But it was quite daunting to know that sometimes when you were announcing things, there were, you know, 15 million people listening to that one link, and you only had about somewhere between 8 and 20 seconds to get your link in, and boy, if you stuffed it up, you just oh no,
oh my gosh,
just, you know, if you stumble over your words or something, which I did do, you know, it's only natural now and again you make a little bit of a mistake. Think, oh well, it's you know, 9 million, 12 million people who heard that, never mind.
What if you start choking on air or something like?
I'd have to style it out.
Oh gosh. Wow, that's incredible. That's so cool. There's such a variety of different skills in each of those areas, each of those newsrooms. And so you worked in commercial, predominantly in news, and then you've built yourself up over time in Essex. What was that journey like for you?
Well, I suppose because I am from Essex, it's like coming home, really. I think I am fiercely passionate. Well, you probably guessed this anyway. I'm fiercely passionate about Essex because it's where I'm from. It's where I live now. And to be honest, I've thought about living other places, but I've never really wanted to leave here because I think there's so much going for Essex. You've got beautiful countryside, you've got sort of real urban feel, cosmopolitan feel, so many different industries, great vibes, and wonderful people. So being able to be back and then to be on breakfast at BBC Essex is quite, I know it sounds a bit soppy, but it is quite a privilege really, because you're waking up people in the county that you live in and that you were born and brought up in. I love it. I can't get enough of it.
Yeah, I love how authentic you are. Like having a conversation in the office or now is exactly what you're like on air. And I think that really shines through. And, some of the top dogs have commented it as well, of how Essex the station is.
But that's the thing. And I think listeners and audiences are smart. And they know, if you watch something about somebody or you're listening to a radio program, if people are putting it on, if they're sort of changing the way they are to fit a certain way. We can all do that. We can all perhaps be a little bit more well-spoken and we can be a different way. But I think the audience generally are pretty smart at figuring out that that's not you. So I think it's really important to be you, and especially when it comes to local, because it's all about where you live, isn't it? It's so much more about the place and to sound like you're from that place and to have the same sense of humor and the same connections and the same taste as other people in that place. It just makes it just sound a lot more genuine and real. And I don't think you should have to pretend, and that's a message I'm constantly trying to get through to my children, especially my daughter. You got to be happy with who you are and try not to pretend, even though there's pressures to change sometimes. Try not to change who you are.
So true. So be authentic, in the workplace, at home, in all areas of your life. So how do you feel about those presenters that are like, hi, coming up, we've got so-and-so, they've got a radio voice?
I don't know, I quite like that. I think there's a place for that, and I suppose it kind of harks back maybe to the 80s and to a heyday of radio, but I think there's a place for that, and that's why I really love radio. There's so many different genres and styles aimed at so many more now than when I first started in 1999. I've seen like some massive changes in radio since I started out. But there's so many different stations and styles now, and I just really hope that as a medium it continues. And I think like the lockdown and the pandemic has actually brought a lot of people closer to things like podcasts and radio, because it's that much more intimate, way more intimate than television ever could be. I think the connection when you're listening to someone but you can't see them is really, really special.
Definitely, it creates a connection, as you said, especially how important it is. It's a lifeline, local radio, for local communities, as quite rightly, you've recognised during the pandemic. I've recognised on the other side as well, on the phones, how important and integral it is for people to be there and feel a part of something, because they are a part of something, and it is so important. So since 1999, what was the radio station?
I feel old now.
That's like the start of an era. That's insane. What was you don't look
I told you I'm old.
No, you don't look at it at all. Well, I can't do maths that quick, so I don't know. I'll have to figure it out later. So what were newsrooms and radio stations like? Because I'm really proud to say that we've got quite a balanced newsroom, and we've got lots of females in management, which is wonderful to see. But not every radio station is like that, with females on air or even off air now, let alone what it was like in 1999.
When I first started working out in radio, it was a time where you could smoke in the newsroom still. Wow. And people would be typing away at scripts, and there'd be a a special printer in the corner where the national and the international news wires would come through, and it would be automatically printing. So it'd be constantly making this printing noise and churning out all the national and international news. And you'd be on another computer typing up the local news to mix into the bulletin, and people would be smoking at the desks. Presenters would come out the studio during a track, light up a cig. It was just a different world. That was 1999. There was quite a lot, because of my initial work in radio was in commercial. Obviously we had the on-air team, the presenting team, the news team, and then we had the sales team. So I suppose in terms of gender, it was a lot of women in the sales team, and it was mostly men on air. There were some women on air, but when I first started, it was mostly men on air, a lot of female newsreaders like me starting out, and there was a bit of, newsreader and finally funny story at the end, a little bit of a giggle with the main male anchor. There was a bit of that, but I think there was equally also quite a lot of people in management, females in management at that time as well. One of the bosses in my early commercial stations was female. I think she ran 2 or 3. So there was already changes afoot. And then as time progressed, I suppose we started seeing quite a lot of cuts to it, and stations suddenly sharing output and rebranding. So we went through a lot of that, which was quite sad. But as you know, it's one of those industries which changes quite a lot, as does a lot of industries actually. So you just kind of have to roll with it, I suppose. But yeah, it's really totally changed. I mean, the technology as well, it had only just gone to digital editing when I first started. Just before that, they were using these whacking great reel-to-reel players and using little white chalks to make the marks, and if you bodged it up and cut it in the wrong place, you'd ruined your soundbite.
That's amazing. Oh my gosh, so much has changed now.
I know.
Wow.
Yeah, I know.
So what advice would you give to people who are starting out in industry, who are starting out in radio? And obviously it's, digitalizing, there's loads of podcasts, and I guess because, as you've highlighted, it is an unstable career, and it can change rapidly. What advice would you give to them?
Definitely be persistent. Sometimes I think with anything in media, with showbiz, and probably other industries as well, you can quite easily get a lot of knockbacks, and there's a lot of other people chomping at the bit to do the same sort of job. So definitely be persistent, because persistence pays off, and it has done time and again with me. Don't sell yourself short as well. Absolutely go for it. Play to your strengths, and don't be afraid to sell those strengths to the max. And if at first you don't succeed, keep on going. Get a bit of experience behind you and know your product. I've interviewed quite a few people over the years when I was news editor, and equally heard about people going for jobs when I wasn't news editor. And the amount of people that go into an interview and don't really know the brand, the business, the product that they're applying for a job to be part of is quite surprising, actually. So always do your homework as well. And if you're going to go for an interview at Vogue magazine, then don't say that you've never read Vogue magazine. Just as an example, I've plucked out of the air. But know your stuff. I think definitely prepare, and yeah, just keep on going. Don't give up, because there are opportunities out there, and sometimes it can feel quite daunting, and that someone else will get it, and I might not have had the best university degree, or I might not have gone to the best university, etc. Actually, none of that matters. You've just got to look at how you can sell yourself, the best bits of you, and keep on going till you shine through.
Also, what I'm really excited to talk about is, for International Women's Day, which is this special, is that you're a superwoman at home. You look after the kids as well. Like, how do you do it? I don't understand. I know that you're psyched up on coffee in the morning, and then how do you just continue on no sleep and prosecco? What's your secret? How do you do it?
Coffee.
Okay, coffee. Always coffee.
And then prosecco, and then I substitute it for prosecco after 7 p.m. I don't. Do you know what, Vicky? Sometimes I actually look at my life and think, how do I do it all? I don't know. You just do. You just adapt to it, and it is hard. It feels like you're spinning a load of plates sometimes, and some days I get to the end of the day and I think, do you know what? I am Superwoman, because I did a really good show at work, and I've done all my work stuff. I've come home, I've put the wash on, I've cooked a nice tea, the kids are happy, I've done this, I've done that, we're excellent. And you just feel like you're on cloud 9. And other days you feel like you're spinning all these plates and they're just crashing down around you, and you're not really doing anything right, which I suppose is just normal. I suppose everyone's like that, whether they've got kids or not. It is a very full-on life. But weirdly, I think if my life wasn't this full on, I don't know what I'd do with myself, actually. I'm so used to it being so busy, and I'm so used to running around after the kids and, you know, making them a new drink and then clearing up the crafts and then doing this and doing that and then preparing for shows and then going on WhatsApp to talk about the shows. There can be quite a lot of guilt, I think, sometimes. And I think this is sort of bringing it back to International Women's Day. I think this is something that women possibly need to look at, because we are terrible for it, where we do constantly feel quite guilty. So you might feel guilty that you are a mum and you're going to work. Because sometimes people do. I noticed, was it Holly Willoughby? She had was it her 40th birthday recently? There's a bit of a backlash from some people on social media saying, well, you know, mum, she's always at work. And so I think there is quite a lot of pressure on working mums, actually. Some people think that you shouldn't be working necessarily if you're a mum. And as a working mum, sometimes I feel quite guilty that perhaps I should be at home and I should be with the kids more. But then I think to myself, actually, I'm showing them a really valuable life lesson too, especially for my daughter, that it's really important that you go out and carve a place for yourself in society. And if there's something you really want to do, whatever that may be, if you're really passionate about it, you should do it, and you should try and find a way to make it work. And there are ways to make it work.
You're a role model, darling.
Just perhaps need to reduce the Prosecco intake ever so slightly, but yeah. And maybe run more, maybe do some more exercise as well.
Oh, I don't know how you'd be able to fit it in with everything. Last question. Obviously you touched on it before, so I kind of got distracted by all these other exciting things I wanted to ask you. So you're from Essex, you love Essex. Where is your number one spot you would recommend someone who might be a bit swayed by the stereotype, so you want to smash that and say, actually, you know, come to this spot in Essex and you'll be blown away by the history or the nature or the culture or the food, and really put it on the map?
Oh gosh, you have to just pick one.
All right, 3. Easily swayed.
Oh gosh, okay. Well, you have got places like Finchingfield in northwest Essex, which is like Chocolate Box Village. It is picture perfect, and it's just, you know, thatched buildings, wonderfully painted cottages and houses. It's just beautiful. And also it's close to motorways and networks, but it's not massively off the beaten track, but it is absolutely stunning. Where else would I pick? Closer to where I live in Colchester, Dedham, Constable Country. It's just stunning. You've got some typically quintessentially British pubs, beautiful places which we hope we can get back to soon. You've got the river where you can hire a boat and eat ice cream. It's awesome. And one of my favourite places to go in the whole wide world, and I love going on my jet set holidays when I can, but one of my favourite places in the whole wide world has to be Walton on the Naze, because you've got these stunning cliffs and you can do fossil hunting, and it's just beautiful. You just would not think you were in Essex.
Some excellent tips there from Sonia about how to get into radio, and some great tourist destinations as well for Essex. You can catch her live from 6 a.m. Monday to Wednesday on BBC Essex. Next up is adventurer, author, cyclist and environmentalist Kate Rawles. She tells me how she lives her life, her cycle trips from Texas to Alaska, and then from Colombia to Cape Horn, all on the back of a bamboo bicycle. She also tells me about the conservation projects she encountered.
In our search for quality of life, we've created ways of trying to increase our quality of life that have a monstrous impact on the environment. And that impact is now becoming unsustainable. And the side effects of it are climate change, biodiversity loss, species extinction. So there are all these impacts that our search for quality of life are having on the environment. And we're just not going to survive them unless we really tackle them. And to tackle them, we need to recreate what we mean by having a high quality of life. And it has to be much less about consumerism, about stuff, about money, about things, and much more about having quality experiences, adventures even, and of course positive relations with our community, with the people around us, with nature, and obviously with ourselves.
It's obviously inspired many of your adventures. I mean, I think we'll start with one of them. So from Texas to Alaska. Yes, tell me about that. So you cycled all the way to Alaska. What was the landscapes like and the response?
So the carbon cycle was really my first attempt at what I now think of as Adventure Plus, which is an attempt to raise my quality of life by having an amazing adventure on a bicycle in mountains, which is the thing I love to do above anything else in the world, I think. So it was an attempt to combine an adventure with a focus on an environmental issue. And in that case, it was climate change, hence the name, the carbon cycle, obviously. And so, yes, I started cycling right on the border between Texas and Mexico, and basically headed up the Rockies on roads. It wasn't an off-road route, and ended up in Alaska. And it was just fantastic, Vicky. I mean, you can imagine starting in a desert and ending up with glaciers running down to the ocean and pretty much every landscape in between. Just fabulous, fabulous mountain scenery, desert scenery, forest scenery. I mean, I just loved it. As well as which I had to kind of an in to talk to all sorts of people about their views of climate change and what they thought was happening and what they thought we should do about it, which at the height of the Bush administration, as you can imagine, was a really, really interesting and sometimes mind-blowingly weird experience.
Yeah, I read into your experiences, and some people, were genuinely concerned for you, and they said, "Hun, like, why don't you have a car? Where are you going? Do you need a hand?" Those kind of things. You're like, "No, I'm choosing to do this." But the landscapes are so diverse. How do you prepare for that, especially when it comes were you wild camping in those situations?
Yeah, and I had a mix of accommodation on that trip. Quite a lot of wild camping further north. It's actually quite hard to wild camp if you're in certain states in America and you're on a road bike with narrow tires and you have a lot of luggage, because a lot of the wildland is fenced off now, and trying to haul a bike over a fence and then pushing it on across fields and so on when it's a narrow wheeled road bike is not entirely easy. So for some of the trip I was using designated campsites, which are great, and occasionally cheap motels, but that was quite occasional because I was on quite a budget. And then further north, it became easier to wild camp, and that's my favorite form of accommodation on a bike trip, really, because you really feel that you're much more in nature. You've been out on your bike all day, and then you go to sleep in your tent, and you can hear birds and when you wake up in the morning, and stars when you come out for a pee in the night, and you just really feel more in the environment rather than just passing through it.
Definitely, and I think that links with your message as well, what you're aiming to do. So from the carbon cycle, then you stepped, even further, and you did the life cycle. So you cycled all the way from Colombia to Cape Horn. Tell me a bit more about the inspiration behind that. Did you think, okay, I need to do something bigger to get the message out? Was that the main aim?
It was a bit of that. It was a kind of combination of the things that I mentioned in terms of the carbon cycle. I wanted some time out. I had been working in a university for 10 years. I really wanted to be back on the road, back on my bike, back in some big mountains. I also wanted to tell another environmental story, and I wanted it to be longer, just to be away for longer, and I wanted the mountains to be bigger. And then I had begun to learn more and more about the ways in which biodiversity loss presents as big a challenge to us as people as climate change does. But at that point, I really wasn't hearing anybody talking about it. So the press weren't really covering it. It wasn't in the media, even as much as it is now, thanks to David Attenborough. And so I thought, well, gosh, I've always been an animal kid. I've always loved wildlife. I've always been drawn to other species. This has got to be my issue. So I did some research around the topic, and my goodness, it is important. It's a really crucial story to be telling. And so those things came together. I quit my job, as you do, and went for it. Luckily, I have a really supportive partner, and that was part of the piece. But nevertheless, I quit my job, and I just kind of leapt into this slightly crazy ambition of cycling from Colombia to Cape Horn, as you said, while trying to unpack the biodiversity story and why it's so important, and what's positive being done, and what can we learn from that back here.
I love how you said take a break, whilst most people take a break as 2 weeks, to a resort and they stay at home, whilst you're like, no, I'm going to quit my job, go to the other side of the world, away from my partner, and cycle through these massive mountains. What was the landscapes like changing from there? Obviously, they're rich and diverse of wildlife, which must have been incredible to see.
Yeah, I mean, again, you've got this amazing diversity of landscapes. So at one point I was on the Caribbean coastline, and you can imagine, turquoise sea, white beaches, palm trees even, you know, all the classic Caribbean sort of stereotypes, and utterly beautiful. And then you come inland for a bit and it's really lush and really hot and there's fruit everywhere and it's just amazing. And then you start to go up into the mountains and you go through all of these different ecosystems, climbing higher and higher, this rainforest, sort of tropical forest, paramo, which is where you have those astonishing huge bromeliad plants that stand up sort of 20 feet in the sky and take more water than they need and release it through the roots. I mean, just astonishing landscapes. Like if you've not been to South America, you would never have seen it, or in my case, even imagined it. And different creatures too, of course. And then of course, for me, perhaps the highlight was the high Andes in Peru. I mean, they're just the classic white spiky mountains of any mountaineer's dream, you know, those beautiful, beautiful mountains. And to ride amongst those for weeks was just fantastic. And also very hard, of course, because often the roads are at 12, 13, 14,000 feet. So not extreme altitude, but enough to make you work, that's for sure.
Gosh, that is so challenging. I watched some of your video, which was beautifully put together. And at one point, you know, there was this huge hill and I remember seeing the rubble and you could see the sunburn on your lips. And I just thought, oh my gosh, that's so challenging. I mean, in those points, how can you overcome that mental state to keep pushing? Is it the drive to push the message out there? Like, I know a lot of people would probably give up and sit on the side and cry for a bit.
Do you know, in all honesty, for most of the trip, I just loved being there. I was so just delighted to be on my bike, on the road and in the mountains. And even when it's hard, there's a sort of joy in that, right? When your body's working and you're feeling tired, but you can keep sort of pushing through that and you're in these amazing places. Occasionally, it would just get really, really exhausting. And there was one occasion in Bolivia when I was in quite a remote park for 4 or 5 days. I mean, really, really pretty remote. It was deep gravel and it was washboardy and it was at altitude and there was a headwind. And I was in a rush because I was meeting my partner at a certain point in Chile in a few weeks' time and I was way behind on schedule. And there was one day where I was working really, really, really hard and my average was 1.6 miles an hour speed because I was pushing the bike most of the day and it was just so demoralizing. And there was one day where I did throw the bike down and say, I can't go on any longer, this is just too much. But then you sort of look around you and you think, well, what are you going to do then? I mean, you don't really have a lot of choice in that situation, do you? When you're in a high altitude desert on your own. So you always do pick up the bike and carry on. And as you just put your finger on it, at the back of my mind was always, well, I could quit. I mean, there's nothing stopping me from just quitting and going home. But somehow telling the story and getting to the end of the journey seemed to get tied up together. And that was a huge extra motivation to actually get to the end, to be able to say, I made it to Ushuaia, the town they call the ends of the earth. And I made it all that way on the bamboo bike, which I built myself, which of course was another part of the story. And that was fairly miraculous in itself because nobody really expected the bike to get out of Colombia, let alone make it to Ushuaia.
Of course. Well, first of all, that's a fitting name where the end of the worlds meet. That's beautiful. But Woody, yes, tell me about Woody. Putting them together. I think you did it in Cornwall. I mean, is he still surviving? Give us an update.
So Woody is alive and well and currently in my sitting room for the winter. Woody is a bamboo bike that I built with help from the Bamboo Bicycle Club in London. But you're absolutely right. The bamboo came from Cornwall, from the Eden Project. So we think Woody is the UK's first homegrown bicycle. However, I had never built a bike before, and it's quite a challenging process, as you can imagine. I mean, fascinating and brilliant, and I loved it, but quite challenging. And so there I was sort of setting off. I crossed the Atlantic on a cargo ship to keep my climate change footprint down. And then I started cycling on this bike that I'd built that I really hadn't had a lot of time to get to know or to sort of wear in. And I had this huge question in my head, well, is this bike actually going to hold together? I mean, and you know what? Woody was fantastic. He was the most reliable, trustworthy, uncomplaining, brilliant, mechanically sound bike I've ever owned. And he just went on and on and on and on and on and on, and hardly any problems for the whole journey. I mean, astonishing. So yeah, he made it, and he is indeed alive and well, and with a bit of luck will be cycling around the country with me in a year or so's time, helping me sell books.
Wonderful. It's so brave. There's so many things there that you've just decided to to leap into the unknown. I mean, with the bike and traveling across the world. And what was a cargo ship like? Because I was actually looking into that whilst traveling within the Philippines, to go to another island. What was that experience like?
Do you know, Vicky, I really loved it. I mean, it's a very different experience from any kind of boat-related experience I'd ever had before. So you have to be very self-sufficient. I mean, basically, you get a room and your 3 meals a day, and that's it. You're allowed to wander about the boat within reason. You have access to the deck, to the bridge rather, so long as you don't speak to the captain if he's on maneuvers, and it is always a he, of course, and that's it really. So it's definitely helpful to have a project, and obviously I had a project, and it's definitely helpful to be pretty self-resilient. But if you have a project and you like being on your own and you just need some time and space and you want to reduce your carbon footprint on a long haul flight, it's a fantastic way to travel. And it's so interesting. I mean, it's a whole world that I knew nothing about. People live on these boats for months and months and months, and I don't know why I'm calling them boats. They're huge ships, aren't they? And they're sort of tracking around the ocean constantly. Apparently, I think it's 90% of everything we own has at some point in its life come on a cargo ship from one place to another. I mean, there's just this huge amount of stuff in motion around the planet the whole time. And it was really, really interesting to kind of witness that. And also to be at sea for big chunks of time out of sight of land, and just to be sitting there looking for flying fish. And yeah, wonderful. I loved it.
How long did it take, the journey in total?
The cargo ship bit was 11 days on the way out.
11 days.
I went from France to Cartagena, which is relatively close. On the way back, it took a month because I caught the cargo ship in Santiago, which obviously is much further down the Pacific coast. So we had to come all the way up the Pacific and then through the Panama Canal, which was just fantastically interesting, as you can imagine, and then across the Atlantic. So that was a whole lot longer. That was really a big chunk of time, but also very helpful. I mean, as you know yourself, and you've been on a big journey and you've been in a completely different space from what we call normal life, to jump on a plane and suddenly be home is a heck of a shock. So actually to decompress and change gear for a month on the cargo ship was really, really helpful. And of course, it gave me a chance to sort my photographs and start preparing slideshows and sort my notes out and just get my head a bit more together. So yeah, it was fantastic. I really, really recommend it if you get the chance.
Yeah, that sounds great. A whole month. Wow. But yeah, you're exactly right. I mean, funnily enough, 10 years today was the first time I came back from my trip, my first big trip alone. I took around New Zealand. And to think I just popped on a plane and that was it. You know, I was seeing my friends and adjusted so quickly. But really, you know, especially with such an epic adventure like yours, it's the chance to reflect and also, you know, write those notes that then later on comes into a book. What was the environmental groups like who you met and mingled with on your trips and your conservation projects?
Yeah, I mean, again, many and varied. I mean, they ranged from people that were working in what we might think of as fairly conventional conservation. So obviously one of the biggest drivers of biodiversity loss is the loss of habitat, and particularly forests. So I met a lot of people that were working to regenerate forests, often in very innovative ways though. So in northern Colombia in particular, the people that are taking down the forests are not the big corporations, which is the story in Brazil, for example, usually in the Amazon, but they're small farmers who just don't have any other way of growing food to feed their families, or they're trying to catch monkeys for the illegal wildlife trade, and again, they don't have any alternative source of income. So quite a lot of the conservation charities were doing habitat preservation and habitat regeneration, but they were also working on sustainable rural development and trying to create alternative incomes for local people. One of them, Project Titi, which was a monkey conservation organization, was doing this by collecting waste plastic in an area where there was no rubbish collection, let alone any recycling, and then working with the local community on a process that would turn the waste plastic into chips, and then those chips into fence posts, which were really durable in a hot, wet climate. And then they could sell the fence posts for enough money to not need to cut down the forest. So it was just a brilliant kind of joined up sort of multiple layer of conservation, but all based on forest regeneration. at the other end of the scale, I met some people that I tackled an issue that I'd never even thought about before I left the country. And that was people that were trying to tackle gold mining and other forms of mining, and in such brave ways. I mean, it's really, really dangerous in Colombia in particular to be an environmentalist who's trying to tackle the mining industry. I mean, that is one of the bravest things you can do. And there is a lot of recorded instances of these people being murdered while they're trying to defend their lands and their communities from the mines. And I really had no idea about how impactful some of the mining processes are on the ecosystems. So, for example, mining for gold involves using mercury and a lot of other heavy metals that then get into the water and poison the watershed. That has a huge impact on farming as well as on the wilder parts of the ecosystem. And these people, often young people, were standing up against these gold mining corporations and trying to get them to leave their communities. So that was a real eye-opener and very inspiring, and also very dark, of course, because you can imagine that mining companies have a lot of money. And in a country like Colombia, which is a fantastic place to be a tourist, you really nevertheless don't want to mess with them.
Wow, they sound like heroes. Is this one of the topics and areas that you explore in your books and in your talks?
Yes, absolutely. I've just been struggling with writing it today. In fact, I've got in the book a little bit further on, and I've just left the Amazon in Ecuador, where I was trying to tell the story about the impact of drilling for oil in the Yasuni National Park there, which is a really heartbreaking story. And again, it's a story of big companies, big money, and local people trying to resist against all the odds, and huge environmental impacts, as you can imagine. I mean, just devastating environmental impacts. And again, that was a big learning for me in the trip. Like, we need conventional habitat restoration and conventional nature conservation and national parks and so on. But we also need to think really hard about how we earn money as countries and what we as consumers do that supports the less savory ways of earning money, let's just say, which brings us back to the beginning of the conversation, doesn't it? And the need to have low impact ways of leading high quality life that are, for example, less oil dependent or less dependent on some of the other products that are mined in these really, really dubious ways.
And so would you say that would be the main message when people do listen to your talks and read your books and hear about your adventures, that they really have a rethink and assess areas of their life that they can change to make a difference?
The main message is biodiversity, other species, nature, if you like, is not a luxury. It's our life support system.
Listening back to that interview makes me want to go on an adventure. Follow Kate and the Outdoor Philosophy on socials, and that way you can keep in the loop in the future for when she will tour the UK with Woody promoting her book. Finally, I speak to actress, writer, comedian and activist Alexis Strum. She tells me about being an almost pop star, the truth about being a creative and working with a number of different mediums, her experiences of being a female comedian, and what it's like being a domestic abuse survivor, and what more needs to be done to help support women like her.
For a good few years, probably about 10 years, I was signed to various labels and made albums, etc. Not that anyone would have heard of them, but I lived the dream. And the thing is, you don't have to have the records out in those days to be able to reap the rewards and be treated like a pop star. So it was a good time. It was a good time in music history. Now I think it's very different. I think you can have a record deal and still have to work a full-time job, I would imagine. But in the halcyon days of the 90s and the early noughties, it was great. I mean, the budgets were just huge. And I had a wonderful time. I definitely don't regret that. But I don't sing anymore. It died.
But you're still performing though, which I think is wonderful on so many different mediums. I mean, you've performed on stage with the British Touring Shakespeare, and also on TV with BBC, Sky, Channel 4, and also a stand-up comedian actually in person, but also online as well. What different medium do you think interests you? How do they differ to you?
So I think the different mediums, like, it's really to do with time. I find that I do something for about 1 to 2 years, and then I feel like I need to evolve and try something else. And it's not that I fail at it, but it's like I kind of get really obsessed with something, and then my interests kind of get piqued elsewhere. And the thing with Twitch, for example, so I started Twitch streaming just during the pandemic. That really was only available to me from that point onwards. So I kind of go with whatever's happening and sort of see if there's an interest. But I think, you know, I like to think of myself as an artist or as a creative. And I always kind of struggle with that because I've had many day jobs as well to keep going. And that's just for the, you know, to pay the mortgage, etc. But I do see myself as, as a creative, and creatives can write a poem one day and then write a script and and I don't have to kind of, answer to anyone for that. And I like that. I'm very attracted to different projects all the time, and you know, I like to keep that kind of flow open, so never say never, you know. And there's always so many opportunities as well, I think. You know, I wrote an article recently for like mainstream press about being a single parent, for example, and that's only came about because I've become a single parent in the last few years. So these kind of opportunities present themselves, and I try not to chase it and just sort of see what go where the love is. I go where the love is, really. Yeah.
100%. As a fellow creative, you know, it's always exploring different mediums and different topics and issues that you're adapting to the situation, and you want to have that variety. You know, variety is the spice of life. It keeps it interesting, it keeps it exciting. And so you mentioned Twitch there. It's just a platform I just don't understand. So if you wouldn't mind sharing a little bit more the ins and outs of it.
Sure. And to be honest with you, if it makes you feel better, I feel the same about TikTok. I've been on there, but I just it doesn't speak to me because it's very, very short form. I'm longer form, sketch, that sort of thing. So Twitch is basically started out as a gaming platform. So people would go on and play computer games, and then they have an audience, and the audience might say, oh, why don't you do that? Or the person, while they're gaming, they're just chatting about their life, and the community interact with them. And one of my actor friends suggested that I might try it out, because I was sort of tailing off going into lockdown and thinking, oh gosh, how can I still put stuff out there? And I was making a lot of sketches on my own, but it's very time consuming. Whereas Twitch, it's live and you just kind of get on with it. So rather than thinking, I don't really play games very much, I thought, well, I'll do some of my comedy stuff, but put it on Twitch. And then sometimes they be a 2-3 hour show. So people are getting way more bang for their buck, you know, much more than you'd be doing in stand up. But you're just kind of sitting I'm in my bedroom at the moment. This is where I stream. And you just kind of sit there, and people come into the chat. And it's like we were saying, like, the creative spark, if you're open to it, you just sort of sit back, and someone might say, oh God, you know, that song that's out at the minute, I really hate it. And then we'll go, well, let's rewrite it and do something really silly and topical. Or I do a show called The HR Department, where I help comedians to find a new job, even though they don't want a new job. And that's just a response to probably me losing my job, and, you know, the kind of conversations that you have with people that are just so insincere, and it just kind of spiked something in my brain, and I thought, oh gosh, that's a character. You know, so it's just lovely. It's been difficult because I've had to take a little bit of time out of it for the last week, and I really miss that. It becomes quite addictive because people are your community, and I've never really had that before. It's different to doing live gigs where every night it's a different crowd, you know, but everyone is there because they've gone into your channel. So it's different in that respect. You still get trolls. The odd troll comes in and might make a comment or whatever, but I think because I'm older, I don't tend to attract that very much. It's the sort of the younger girls that are, dare I say it, very attractive. I'm kind of like, I sit there and think, no one's trolling me today, but it's a blessing, believe me. I don't miss that for 1 second. And it's really been a lifeline, actually. And it's sparked lots of other ideas about things that I want to write next or be in next, you know. So it's
first of all, I just want to interrupt you and say, don't be so ridiculous. You're attractive.
Oh, no, do you know what? I'm having a crisis at the moment. I'm having one of those awful crises where you look in the mirror and you're just like, everything's gone a bit lockdown has not been kind in those kind of ways, and I think I've been spending too much time on Instagram, which is something I'm really going to be putting back on.
Definitely.
Yeah, it's and the TikTok thing. So the other night I was bored and I was like scrolling through, and everyone is so perfect, and I know it's filters. There's like this sort of what do they call that, when you know something but you can't reconcile it in your head. Like, you know that there's filters, you know that they've got stylists and helpers and stuff, and I'm a woman of a certain age, and even I get fooled by it and kind of feel, I come away and I look in the mirror and think, oh God, you know, there's that moment of revelation that you don't look like the people that you're scrolling through, and it affects everyone, really.
Oh, of course it does. It affects everyone. It's so negative, social media tapping into that, but doom scrolling as well. It's like it's like an addiction. You know, you're in a bad kind of headspace, so you decide to make yourself worse by searching out the things that are going to make you feel worse, or, you know, you're just minding your everyday business and then you realize this person's perfect, let's go on their profile, thousands and thousands of followers for doing nothing. You know, so it's, I completely understand that, but that's why it's so important to recognize, like you said, about having a creative and collaborative community and using social media for the right things. And as you said with Twitch, that's what you use with your platform. I recently actually saw Funny Woman on Twitch. They did their own show for International Women's Day, and you've worked with Funny Woman before.
I did a podcast with them, but I mean, then I've kind of got really into the whole Twitch thing, and that sort of took over. Also, the thing about Twitch is, like, you have to put the time into it, because once you get a community, they expect something from you, in the same way that I expect to turn on the TV at 7:30 and see EastEnders. I think it's on at 7:30. I don't watch it. You know what I mean? The analogy. So you kind of have to deliver. And as I say, like, because I've had lots of personal stuff going on, I've had to change my schedule a lot. And even for this interview today, you know, I didn't think I was going to make it on time, things like that. I don't like that. I don't like having to, I like to be reliable. And I think that's one of the reasons that I've been semi-successful to date, is because people know that if they book me for something, that I'm going to turn up, I'm going to say the lines in the right order, and I'm not going to be an arsehole to anybody. So it's kind of, it's, my reputation's actually really important to me, and I hadn't realised that till now. Not in a vanity kind of sense, but just how I'm perceived. So yeah, it's been interesting. I've been having to really tackle that at the moment, but, you know, life gets in the way. Thankfully, people are very understanding with COVID and the impact of that. But I want to get onto a more sort of, I need to get a schedule going, and it's, having a child in a pandemic and having to teach them and stuff, that just totally knocked it on its head, really.
Of course.
So hopefully we'll see what happens when she's back at school.
Yes, hopefully we'll get more into the swing of it once again. But I completely understand what you mean. It's the same with Instagram influencers. You know, people want their content every single day. I've seen people unfollow someone because they're not posting regularly. You know, I've seen the change of followers, which I think is shocking. When it comes to stand-up, what was the first moment like when you went out and did stand-up for the first time? What was that feeling like?
Oh, it was exhilarating. I remember my very first gig, and it was in the back of a pub somewhere in London. And, you know, I'd obviously been practicing my routine on my mum, which is like the weirdest thing to do. That was more terrifying, to just do the routine for the first time in front of someone else. So by the time I did it in front of a room of people, I'd already, you know, ripped off the Band-Aid, as it were. And I used to do stand-up in character. So that really helps as well. I used to do it as this character called Denise, who's like this Aussie wannabe influencer kind of type. So it was great, you know, to be someone that's an idiot. I love being an idiot, or playing an idiot. But probably if I went back to it now, I would do it as myself. I think it was a lack of confidence that I thought, well, if I pretend to be someone else and no one likes me, that's fine, because that was just a character. But actually what happened was, I did a few gigs where, going back to this thing of they weren't my audience, you just do open spots, whatever. And I did a few gigs where people thought I just was that person, and they didn't get the joke. And that was like, am I just too good an actress? But, you know, they just didn't get the joke. They just thought, why is this really awful person going on stage and being so vile?
Gosh, that's awkward. Yeah.
But but some of the gigs were fantastic. I really enjoyed it. And then I got pregnant, and I got to the point where I was so massively pregnant that I'd get a gasp, when I walked on stage. And that, I remember the last gig I did, it was just because there was too many gasps in too many areas of the audience. And I just thought, no, I can't do this. I mean, since then, I've noticed a lot of other comedians have been doing it whilst massively pregnant. And Amy Schumer, for example, did a great job, but then she's Amy Schumer. So it's acceptable, but yeah, it was not acceptable.
That's what I was going to ask. Thank you for leading me straight into that question. How do you feel that women are perceived in comedy, and is it a lot more challenging for women to become a comedian?
I want to be inspiring, but I'm going to have to say no. It's really hard. It's worse than you think, but that shouldn't stop you. There are, in the same way that there are brackets of male comedians, like the kind of typical young white male studenty type, there are tropes of female comedians, and you feel obligated to kind of squeeze yourself into one of those. You could be like the agitator or the mum comic talking about, oh god, when my bladder prolapse and stuff, or there's like different brackets, and it's kind of hard to go, do you know what, I just want to just see what comes out and go down that route. Also, you have the pressure of agents, because those sides of people that want to put you in a mold, because they're like, well, if you do this you can get on this, etc. So there's always going to be fewer women on the bill, of course, and you only need to look at panel shows to see that despite everything and all the attempts made, it's still unequal. I think if I hadn't have got pregnant, I would have still left, because it just felt very much like I was doing a job where nobody wanted me to be there a lot of the time. So I remember doing a gig at Colchester. I was in the Colchester finalist. I was a finalist in Colchester Comedian of the Year. And the guy that went on before me did a rape joke about punching his girlfriend in the throat during sex.
Wow.
And the audience thought he was the funniest thing in the world, and they were laughing their heads off. And I'm in the wings, not noticeably pregnant at that point, about to go on stage and just thinking, oh my God, there's like an ethical thing here. I'm not sure I can actually go on. Or do I go on and do that film moment and go, hey, everyone, this is just not right. We've got to like love each other. And that was hard to see, because it's kind of like when a lot of this cancel culture that's happened during the pandemic, you're seeing that, in print, where someone will say something really terrible, like an anti-Black Lives Matter comment or something, and then other people actually post their thoughts, and you're like, wow, those people really do exist, don't they? And it's kind of quite terrifying to just think, wow, there's some really bad people in the world. It is hard, but I think you don't have to. Well, if you're confident enough, you could probably navigate it and find your own niche, etc. And there are some great female comedians that are coming forward now, but you're always going to get the opposition, which is that women aren't funny, and no one ever sits there and says men aren't funny, prove it. Whereas we're always having to kind of go that little step further to justify it, and I think that does impact psychologically, and even in the way that you promote yourself on social media, or that you put yourself forward for gigs and stuff. You're always on the back foot thinking, oh, someone's doing you a favor because we're not really funny, are we? And it's like, oh, thank you. Oh, thanks so much for, letting me come on and be funny. And I've seen some not nice behavior. I know there was a whole thing recently about, there are a few stand-up comedians, male, who have sexually assaulted other female comedians, and it's taken till now for them to be able to talk about it publicly. And yeah, I could see how that's possible. It's not happened to me, but I can see that it fosters an environment where that becomes acceptable.
So you highlighted there as well, sexual assault, violence against women that's spoken about on stage. And you've also worked with Women's Aid. You've done a streamathon. What was that like?
That was great. That was really good. It was good to be able to harness the power of Twitch and the community that I've built up there, and to actually do something for good. And I wanted to do it once I'd established myself. Otherwise, you know, if no one comes along, it's kind of pointless, really, because you want people to donate as much as possible. And I've seen there's a lot of streamers now who will leverage their stream to raise money for charity. Yeah, it was a good way to kind of combine the two things. And it's funny because I feel like I'm getting ever more, as much as I don't want to have to get into this world because it's so upsetting. It really is. It's such, you know, anyone that sort of tries to start becoming an activist or, you know, changing the world, you're setting yourself up for huge disappointment and sadness and trauma and yeah, disappointment and rage and all of these things. But I kind of feel like the more that I do, and the more that I get the opportunity to have a voice or listeners or an audience, it feels like that I have no choice but to try and raise awareness of the issues that really affect me and women close to me, etc. And, you know, having survived domestic violence, it's really important for me to try and use what I'm doing and my creative energy to just kind of every so often say, oh, now I've got your attention. Can we just talk about this? Because this is really important to me. You can do something about it and you can support it if you want to, but let me just tell you some of the facts, or, you know, or just give you a little bit of an idea. And then we'll go back to having the fun part and we'll do all of that. But it is important, if you're going to do anything in the public eye, to have some influence. You know, influencing and influencers, it's kind of a bit of a negative connotation, right? But, you know, if you can use it to influence people for good, then I don't mind that kind of influencing. You know, if I'm doing it with a great big filter and half my legs chopped off so I look better or whatever, that's different. But it's just so important to me, you know. And I've done another project as well for Ava, who they approached me about working on an app for women who are in need of support if they've been domestically abused. And there's a few of us that do it. It's all peer, what do they call it? Lived experience peers sort of thing, peer support. And then we give our feedback because we've experienced it. And then it helps to improve what, say, the technical people that are designing this app, they've got no experience of what that feels like. And so we give our input, and that's massively rewarding. So yeah, I want to do more of that as much as I can. It's just trying to sort of it's not always that I'm too busy. It's just sometimes it's quite triggering to do it, and I have to go away afterwards and like have a couple of days to just decompress, because when you're hearing other people's stories as well, that's it's quite a responsibility, you know.
Well, it's wonderful that you're using your platform to help people, and with your own experience as well, however draining and emotionally tough and traumatizing that is for you, that you're using your experiences to help others in a wider perspective, which is inspirational and empowering. And, you know, I think it is important to lay those boundaries and say, okay, you know, that's enough. I'm going to have a break now, because you're raising your own daughter. You've got to think of yourself sometime. Now, currently in this pandemic, the UN has said that, you know, domestic violence has escalated. We're going to have a shadow pandemic with all the impact on individuals. What advice would you give to someone who's in that situation to get the confidence to be able to leave?
That's really hard, because leaving is the starting point of the next phase, which isn't always as straightforward as you've left that person, you don't see them again. So you have to kind of accept that you're going to have to embrace a whole support network, and it really isn't something you can do alone. You know, there are IDVAs that you would get so if you contacted your local domestic abuse charity, which could be Women's Aid, or it could be Solace, or wherever you live, they have their own, it's done by area. So you'll contact them, and then they will start putting all these lovely bits of the bubble around you, you know, the little gates around you, which could be some mental health support. It could be courses. There are courses now that you can be put forward for, which are like the Freedom Program, or I think the one that I did was called something similar like that. But they kind of like not rehabilitate you, but they give you in your groups of peers, they give you the sort of techniques to be able to recognize red flags in potential new partners, how to navigate the legal system, etc. So you would have that. Then you've got loads of resources online, forums, etc. The police, you know, you can get some legal support from Rights for Women, I think they're called, and there's lots of other charities. So these things, you kind of build this around you, and then you step out there. You know, if you just go, there are options for you, and certainly the Women's Aid Rail to Refuge scheme is great. So they'll provide you with, well, they'll connect you with the refuge and provide you with a train ticket anywhere in the country to go to that refuge for free. So there are schemes like that, and sometimes you don't have the benefit of the time to be able to think about it before you go. I mean, I've heard of, there was one lady I met who, she used to save up the coins she found from her partner down the sofa until she had enough coins to be able to get like a bus fare or whatever it was, because, you know, she'd find the 1p's and the 2p's and then sort of hide them somewhere because you wouldn't let her have any access to money. And then when she had saved up what she felt was enough, that was when she went. So everyone has their own timeline. And also, I think it takes on average 7 attempts for a woman to leave a partner to actually be out of that relationship. So you hear a lot of the woman goes back, you know, he promises he's going to change, etc. And it's something that we really can't be judgmental over, because unless you've been in that situation, it is incredibly hard to leave. By that point, you've had everything stripped away, and you think it's easier for me to stay. It might be that all your money's been, he's taken all your money. It could be that you don't have any friends anymore because he's kind of discouraged that, or family. And then you're left with absolutely no support at all. So you can understand why someone would stay, especially if there's children involved. So yeah, that's one of the biggest myths, I suppose. And that is something that would dissuade a person from being sympathetic, I think, towards victims of domestic abuse. And even saying the word victims, it's like you're survivors, but it's that, you know, that's why sometimes it's difficult to, sympathize with a woman in that situation. You're kind of, women are in that situation are branded idiots or not strong enough or something like that, but it's so complicated. But, you know, there's been a lot of campaigns over the pandemic as well, which will help, I think. But there's a long way to go. There's a really long way to go. I think we're so far behind because of the pandemic, unfortunately. And even with the, you know, this idea of June the 21st, it's all going to change and go back to normal. I don't know. I think maybe there's a lot of women out there, and I hate to think this, that are waiting until that date, you know, that are sat at home now, thinking, do you know what, I'll just hang in there like we did last year. Oh, it's okay, it'll all be over by September. And they're just kind of hanging in there thinking, well, June, that's going to change. So please God, by then there'll be more funding in domestic abuse services as well. Otherwise it's quite a bleak prospect, really.
What an incredibly strong woman. Make sure to follow her on socials, Alexis Strum, so you can support her comedy work and the various charities that it will help and benefit so many women across the country. That concludes a real kick-ass episode for International Women's Month. What incredible women, defeating obstacles and anything else that's chucked their way. I'm so delighted to have spoken to Sonia Watson, Kate Rawles and Alexis Strum on this month's Let's Go Kick-Ass Today podcast. Do make sure to comment, subscribe, rate and share. I'm Vicky Carter, and you keep kicking ass.